Hey YouTube, Kiritwig here, bringing you all an update to my Naturia Yugioh deck profile for January 2025. Wanted to have the Naturia deck be one of the first decks I update for the new year, with it being one of my favorites, sticking to the pure variant that I always like to update on the channel as well. The Naturia deck is best known for its lockdown capabilities that it can do, with a couple of its main deck monsters, and also the Synchro and Fusion monsters that you can make in the extra deck as well. We received some fairly new support a while back from some of the newer Yu-Gi-Oh booster sets, but we still have Sacred Tree at 1 in the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG, so we're making do with what we have for the deck and its lockdown playstyle. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the main deck monsters. For my favorite Naturia monster to run in the main deck, we're running 2 copies of Naturia Bamboo Shoot. If this card is tribute summoned by tributing a Naturia monster, while this card remains face up on the field, your opponent cannot activate spell or trap cards. So this is a pretty good lockdown for 2/3 of the cards that your opponent can even use in their deck. Not being able to activate these cards while this card is on the field means that your opponent has to basically just try to negate the effect of Naturia Bamboo Shoot, or get over it with a monster card, which is where the other cards in the deck fall into place as well, to stop our opponent from doing so. They can't use cards like Impermanence because they can't activate traps, so as soon as you tribute out your Bamboo Shoot, they are locked into what they can activate. The best bet would just be, obviously, Effect Veiler to negate the effect of Bamboo Shoot, but that's really one of their only options to rely on because no other effect activates. You know, they can't Ash Blossom it. It really is that difficult of a choice to get around the Bamboo Shoot, so then the next step will be protecting this card on the field. For the other Naturia monsters, we're running 3 copies of Naturia Camellia. When this card is normal or special summoned, you can send 1 Naturia card from your deck to the graveyard. If you would tribute a monster to activate a Naturia monster effect, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the graveyard instead. If your opponent's normal or special summons a monster, except during the damage step, you can special summon 1 Naturia monster from your graveyard. You can only use this effect of Camellia once per turn, but being able to send a Naturia card means we can send Sacred Tree, and then when Sacred Tree is sent to the graveyard, we can search out a Naturia monster to add 1 Naturia card from our deck to our hand. So this could be one of the easy ways to search out Bamboo Shoot without having to rely on any other search and setup with the use of this card. And there are ways you can special summon out Camellia onto the field and save your tribute summon for your Bamboo Shoot. We're also running 3 copies of Naturia Mole Cricket. During the main phase quick effect, you can tribute this card to special summon 1 Naturia monster from your deck, or you can special summon 2 if your opponent controls a monster with the highest attack on the field, even if it's tied. If your opponent special summons a monster from the extra deck, or you special summon a Naturia monster from the extra deck while this card's in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card. You can use each effect of Mole Cricket once per turn. So Mole Cricket also gives you the option for the tribute, which if you have Camellia on the field, you can use the send 2 from the deck instead and keep your Mole Cricket on the field to then use the following turn as well. Getting 2 monsters mean you can have your resource to use against your opponent as well, because if they control the highest monster with the highest attack, you can get 2 Naturia monsters on the field and then use those 2 for a synchro play. The last of the 3 ofs for the Naturia monsters that we run are the 3 copies of Naturia Yugioh. Just another, interesting card for your opponent to play around. When your opponent special summons a monster, you can special summon 1 level 3 or lower Naturia monster from your deck, which we do run a good variety of, including the Mole Cricket we already spoke of before. And this is done once per turn, so every time our opponent special summons, we can easily fill up our field with different Naturia monsters, and a lot of them rely on the tribute effect that we mentioned before, so the more we set up, the more negations we could potentially have to use against them as well. Some of the better lockdown cards for those plays are the next monsters we run, including the 1 copy of Naturia Vein, the 1 Sunflower, and the 1 Stink Bug. You don't really have a tribute effect with Stink Bug, but being able to send this face-up card you control to the graveyard to negate the attack and end the battle phase when a face-up Naturia monster is selected as an attack target can be another way to protect cards like our Bamboo Shoot. And then Sunflower and Vein can stop a spell or trap or a monster effect activation when it is activated by tributing this card and 1 other Naturia monster. So then those tribute plays can also be used with Camellia, sending 2, and then these aren't once per turns, so with the 1 tribute being used, you then have the additional negation to use for the second tribute afterwards. And then for the last of the Naturia monsters, 1 copy of Fruit Fly, 1 copy of Marin, and the 1 Horn Needle. You have the Special Summon Negation with Horn Needle, the Recycle Power with Marin, and then the Attack Lowering Power, and being able to take control of an opponent's monster with 0 defense, with each one of them losing 300 attack and defense for each Naturia monster you control. So with these cards, you can have Fruit Fly be one of the cards you summon off of Antjaw, same with Marin, but then the big plays here, being able to use these cards as that added build-up to make your opponent's monsters weaker and weaker. The non-Naturia engine that I run, we are running 3 copies of Redox, Dragon Ruler of Boulders, in the deck now, just being a bigger boss monster to potentially set up on the field for its ease of special summon, but also its special summon resource, being able to discard this card on 1 Earth monster to the graveyard to target an Earth monster, or 1 monster in your graveyard, doesn't have to be an Earth monster, and summon it back to the field, giving you recycle power in the form of Mole Cricket and Camellia, as long as we have those resources in the graveyard before we discard the Redox and another monster. Let's say the Mole Cricket's in the graveyard, we could potentially discard the Redox and the Camellia to grab the same Camellia that we summoned to the graveyard, giving us another special summon answer before we go for our tribute play once again from there. And lastly, for the main deck monsters, 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. I run a small hand trap lineup along with the trap lineup to begin with in the deck for protecting my Naturia Bamboo Shoot play on the field. So 3 Ash Blossom just to stop any search and setup our opponent may try to do. For the spells, running 3 copies of Naturia Blessing. This is a very important card in the deck. It just helps for a potential quick play for a synchro or fusion summon, but it also lets you just special summon a Naturia monster from your hand or graveyard, getting that resource onto the field for you to use, whether it be for a synchro play or a tribute summon for your Naturia monster. And then the synchro summon of a monster using monsters you control on the field, or a fusion summon of a fusion using monsters you can control, including a Naturia monster, and it has to be applied for both to use a Naturia monster for that play. I also run 2 copies of Pot of Desires, just more draw power in the deck. There are particular cards that we run 3 of that are fine for the search we want to go for, but there's really not one card that if it were to get banished, it would throw off the entire play of the deck. A lot of times you can set up your Camellia, Naturia Sacred Tree search, and then go for the Desires to draw into some more needed spell and traps to use later on. And then the other spells being 1 Monster Reborn, and then the 1/1-for-1. Just additional special summon cards, whether they be for our Mole Cricket or just more monsters from the graveyard. For the traps, we run the 1 copy of Naturia Sacred Tree. As I said before, this card is at 1 currently, and most of the time, you're not going to use it for its insect plant swap out effect on the field. You're going to use it as a send target for Camellia to be able to then get a search of a Naturia monster from our deck to the hand after it's sent to the graveyard. I also like running 2 copies of Safe Zone. This is another protection combo that I'm a big fan of with Naturia Bamboo Shoot on the field, because then it cannot be destroyed by battle, and also with this card being able to not be destroyed by your opponent's card effects as well. So if they try to destroy something, Safe Zone will keep that monster safe. If you don't want to use this card in the deck, you can always increase the counter trap lineup that I run in just a bit. But before that, the 1 Goes in match, we run a good variety of Earth attribute monsters in the extra deck, and the majority of them being Earth in the main deck. So this can just help to limit more of what our opponent can do in the deck. The 2 copies of Solemn Strike and the 2 copies of Solemn Judgment. Once again, the biggest thing I would say would be a potential monster your opponent summoned out. If they can summon out, SP Little Knight, then that is definitely something that can get rid of Bamboo Shoot on the field. So you want to be able to use cards like Strike or Judgment to stop the summon or the effect of that monster before it even hits the field. If you wanted to increase the number of these cards, you can drop down Safe Zone by both numbers and increase each copy to a third of count in the deck, with the last of the traps being the 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. Same setup. You can get your Bamboo Shoot on the field, set your Impermanence, then if your opponent tries to use a monster effect, just flip this card up and negate that effect for this turn. For the extra deck, running 2 copies of Naturia Beast. Just being able to negate a spell card while setting up more monsters in the graveyard potentially means that with the send from the top of the deck, we could mill a Redox off of this card as well to then summon back onto the field the following turn. And it's not a once per turn spell negation as long as we have cards in the deck. The more cards we send from the top of the deck to the graveyard, the more spell negation we can go for. The 1 copy of Naturia Barkion for the trap negation, while not as needed, it is one of the cards that we do use to summon out our fusion monsters. So with this card and Beast being able to be summoned on the field, you can use Beast and then a level 1 tuner that we run in the deck in the form of our Naturia Vein to then be able to use those 2 cards to be able to go right into Barkion and save that play from there. and also the 1 copy of Leo, Keeper of the Sacred Tree, the 1 Black Rose Dragon, the 1 Herald of the Arclight, and the 1 Yugioh Guardian. For more different negation options, take control resources of our opponent. The Plant Banish really goes well with the Black Rose Dragon as well, and I'm running Leo in the deck just as an homage to the Naturia setup, since it was the Naturia Leo Drake originally from the same archetype, with the rest of the synchros being 1 Sword Soul Supreme Sovereign Shenying and the 1 Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. Additional monsters to be able to go into, since we don't have Borreload Savage Dragon and Baron de Fleur to run in the deck. Our only fusion monster that we run is the Naturia Exterio in the deck. It's a spell and trap negation. All we need to do is send the top card of our deck to the graveyard and banish 1 card from our graveyard, and then destroy that card. This card must be on the face of the field to activate and resolve this, but once again, a bigger boss monster to summon out using the spell that we run of the Naturias, being the Naturia Blessing, and having our Beast and Barkion on the field also to go into this card. If you wanted to run a card called Miracle Synchro Fusion, you could always try taking out one of the Desires or the Monster Reborn or 1 for 1 to add a copy of that spell that can use the Naturia Beast and Barkion in the graveyard to banish to summon out Exterio that way. And then the 1 copy of Relinquished Anima, the 1 SP Little Knight, the 1 Nightmare Cerberus, the 1 IP Masquerena, and the 1 Nightmare Unicorn for the rest of the Link monsters that we run in the deck as well. As for some of the go-to plays in the deck, the first one is obviously the Naturia Bamboo Shoot play. So let's say we have 2 cards that can set up that combo in our hand, just being the Naturia Camellia, the Naturia Blessing, and the more traps we get with this opening hand, the better we have for protection for our Naturia Bamboo Shoot on the field. So whatever we may have, whether it's a hand trap, a couple cards for that lineup, having these 2 cards with the initial setup, I would say is the ideal play to go for, because then what you'll do is you will activate your Blessing, summoning out your Camellia from your hand, activating Camellia to then send your Naturia Sacred Tree to the graveyard. This will activate the Sacred Tree, adding the Bamboo Shoot to your hand. You have not yet, normal summon, so then you contribute out the Camellia for your Bamboo Shoot, and right there on your first turn, you have locked your opponent out of being able to use any spell or trap, so they can't use the impermanence from hand. If they had the impermanence, they should have used it on the Camellia beforehand, but if they didn't do it by there, you can assume they don't have it yet in their hand. But then you have this card ready to go, and your opponent's already locked out of 2 or 3 traps. You can then set the remaining traps on your field, having an initial hand trap to use as well to stop that play. So with the thought that they have the majority of the spell and traps not being able to use in your hand, as long as you can stop the other cards with these counter traps and your Ash Blossom, you'll be able to go into your next turn with a Bamboo Shoot that can either swing over an opponent's monster or stop an additional play from there. The next one would be the setup with the play being, once again, as we mentioned before, with the Naturia Camellia, and then the send of the Sacred Tree with your Blessing. Tree this time can be used to grab your Mole Cricket, which you can then summon onto the field as well, and then being able to use this play, being able to tribute this card, but instead of the tribute, you can use the Camellia to send the top 2 cards of your deck for the tribute. And if you get Redox, it's all the better, because then you have an additional resource to summon from the graveyard onto the field. And then from there, you can use the Mole Cricket to summon out an additional monster from your deck to the field. If you get the Antjaw for that play, you then have a monster that can respond to any of your opponent's special summons, but then you can go for the level 5 Synchro play for you to summon out your Naturia Beast, having a spell locked down and then an additional monster on the field that can give you more and more special summons from your deck to the field as well, which your first one wanting to be the Mole Cricket, because the Mole Cricket special summon is a quick play, because then you can use that card in tandem for an additional summon as well. But that is for the synchro plays. As for more of the setup before that I mentioned, you have more of a reliance on the Camellia setup, as I mentioned before, but there are some other things that you can rely on. If you go for the 1-for-1 play, it has the same setup. You just have to go through a Mole Cricket, tributing that for the Camellia play, and they can get you around the same setup that we wanted before, just with a couple additional cards, because you do have to send a monster from your hand to the graveyard to be able to do that play, and then rely on more or less the other Naturia monsters for that summon as well. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Once again, always like updating the Naturia deck, and wanted to start off the year strong with the update to one of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh decks. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.